frozen conflicts.
Thank you. I guess a lot of people are going to be talking about Georgia because I see it from the program, so I would not go into details, I guess, of the Georgia conflict itself, but I'll try to equate some of the parallels as well as the lessons. But before that, I'll go into a bit of historic context of how I see things and how things went for Georgia, but also for the wider region. Of course, one thing that we can see definitely is the emergence of the problems that we are facing right now, stemming from the 90s. And in 90s, there were many things which actually predisposed us to face these problems. And of course, one of the things I have to point out was the disengagement of the West during those times. And I think when we talk about this, we have to see that there are certain parallels that we see right now. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was definitely a desire in Moscow to keep the tabs on the new republics. Of course, there was less of an understanding of a cohesive policy of how it should look. It was very loose. But there was still a thinking that Russia should be present and Russia should be a player when it comes to the fate of these countries. And of course, if we look at the succession of events which took place across the regions and in all the countries that we are talking today, we'll see that there is a very clear Russian trace. And of course, the biggest problems which were not really that evident during those times, but when we analyze it right now in retrospect, we see that there are a lot of commonalities. And of course, when we're talking about the problems itself, and we have to identify the problems with elites, the local elites who actually saw the opportunity to advance their own goal, which was very much supported by the Russians during those times. So the elites did play the role. Of course, there was a problem of weak governments. That was the problem across all the states. Unfortunately, Georgia is a very, very stark example of this, and the lack of capacity to actually perform the state functions was one of the biggest problems during those times. Of course, internal divisions, which was very much played out also sometimes by Russian interests present in our country. Of course, it was about the very understanding of nationalism, which actually played the very, I would say, dysfunctional role, but not the main role, as some of the experts would like to talk about it, branding it mostly as an ethno conflict, which I will definitely not agree about. I think it's a political conflict if one wants to look at it from different perspectives. So the Russia itself, just to go back to the premise that Russia itself was very loose inside, so they didn't have their own thinking about the region. Okay, they did have this intention to control it. They did have an intention to be present when it comes to be the resolution of the conflict or some type of the future of the conflict. But they lacked the cohesive, let's say, vision. Of course, they didn't obstruct them from being actually part of the post-conflict arrangements. And if we look at the post-conflict arrangements, let it be the peace arrangements, peacemaking arrangements or the peacekeeping arrangements or whatever, you'll see that there is a very common trait of the Russian presence there. I mean, if we look at the Dagomis Accords, which actually basically created the South Ossetia peacekeeping process, you'll see that the very structure of it was very much predisposed to create the preconditions for Georgia to be underrepresented. I mean, it was basically Russia together with North Ossetia, which was basically a cover for South Ossetia as well as and Georgia. The same exact logic was applied, by the way, in Transnistria, where the same footprint was used. Also, we had the OSCE there involved as well. So you can say that that's a mirror of what happened in South Ossetia context. But then there was an interesting development of the Abkhaz direction, where we had the CIS being part of it, as Russia kind of took up the role where it was represented as a peacekeeper, which was assigned by the CIS. yes, there was an appeal from the Georgia during those times because Georgia was feeling extremely weak, as I said, because of the weak central government, because of the very domestically, I would say, domestic weaknesses that Georgia was prone to be vulnerable to. So what we are getting there is that the cobwebs that Russia has been building were very much along the lines of divide and rule, but at the same time, I would like to make a clear point that it was problem of the West as well, because West was largely disengaged. And I don't want to equate it with the problems that we're facing right now, but definitely that was the biggest problem. Why? Because no one actually was thinking enough about the strategic connotation of what was happening in the region during those times, because everyone was in the mood of this so-called post-Cold War victorious flair. Everyone was thinking that Russia was too weak, which was, I mean, there were some grounds to say that they were not the major power during those times, but still this whole understanding that Russia was too weak, there was no desire to be involved here. We have to talk about the United States during those times, which was actually not very outside looking, and the Clintons' first term was the glare, let's say, example of this. Of course, the second term was definitely not the same because of many reasons, but even during those times, with the appointment of Madeleine Albright, the whole aspect of the U.S. policy was directed towards Balkans. So the Balkans became the new, let's say, a preoccupation of the West, which I would say very much created the impression that the region that we are representing was not a priority region. And in many ways, whatever we are getting as a legacy stems from the fact that this region was disregarded for quite some time. Of course, with the ascension of Putin, this whole perception of the weakness and the whole perception of the Russia's incohesive policies have started to be diminishing. And I'll try to give you my perspective of what we are witnessing right now in Crimea and how the roots of this have been actually starting from the early 2000s. Of course, the Chechen, the second war of Chechnya was very important pillar. I think the whole idea about leaving the legacy of the loose Russia, which was characterized, once again, I would like to say, with the financial crisis, with the loose power arrangements inside Russia, and actually a very weak elite cohesion is disappearing because of the domestic consolidation which took place in Russia. Of course, Chechen War was the first demonstration and illustration that Russia was going to be very assertive. And I think that was the clear signs of this started from the outset of the Putin's ascension, which was actually, and Chechen War was used as one of the image builders for Putin. But of course, then we're seeing some of the policy pillars that Russia has actually put in place. And here I have to talk about the passportization policy, which is actually, I don't agree with my friend here that the Russian passports are not that big of a problem and that can actually be trumping the so-called confidence building with this with the issue of passports. I mean, I think that this has a rudimentary importance for the way West will be countering the Russia's future moves, and I'll try to explain why. In 2002, when these amendments were introduced to the law on Russian citizenship, they were talking about the Russian citizenship being given to people who are descendants, who have lived in the Soviet Union and who are stateless. So they were basically trying to target those people who were mostly in the so-called the conflict zone. So it was, of course, Georgia, definitely Transnistria, and few other areas. And many people don't talk about some of the other problems. For example, in Samtskhe-Javakheti, we actually have the same problem. And many people have started to talk about the problems now. Actually, most of the people in Samtskhe-Javakheti already have Russian passports. And that's the big problem. I mean, I'm not talking that it all started now. Actually, it has started in 2002, and even now, when we are looking at Transnistria, there are approximately 150,000 people who hold Russian passports, and that's almost a third of the population there. So. But the very idea which was attached to the Russian citizenship was very different from what they have introduced now. Actually, on April 4th, they introduced new amendments to the law, which are just something that we all should be closely looking at, because now they are introducing a whole different concept. They're expanding the concept of whom the civic, let's say the civic understanding of the Russian citizen can expand. What I mean here, they're talking about all the people who have lived themselves or are direct descendants of people who have lived on the post-Soviet space of USSR plus Russian Empire, which actually goes beyond the present USSR, former USSR, let's say the scope or the area. But apart from this, they actually introduce a new, very interesting element into the simplified measures that they're going to be introducing for granting the citizenship, which is Russian speakers. So Russian speakers, together with their residents in the territories that these people have been living on, will be considered to be a prerequisite for them to take up the Russian citizenship. Well, I would like to jump later to the Eurasianism, which is going to be very much fitting into this whole concept. But the expanded Russian citizenship concept is a very interesting one, because it actually creates a whole different dynamic. There is another very interesting development within these new amendments to the law, which says that once the person receives the Russian passports or Russian citizenship, they have to relinquish their own citizenship or the citizenship of the host country that they are belonging to at the moment. Well, so this is not anymore about the conflict regions, which was the kind of the thinking during early 2000s, because they needed the casus belli, basically, for intervention. So now it's more about a long-term project, because they're thinking about creating a common space. I'm not saying, and I have my opinion if it's going to be effective, if it's going to work or not, but still that's the thinking in Moscow. So there is the clear evolution of the Russian thinking about how they have to be treating the policy towards the regions, but also towards the countries. And actually, I mean, just to give you this evolution, how I see it, the term "new abroad," which was many think that it was created by during the Putin times, was not the case. I mean, actually, during Yeltsin's times. I mean, Yeltsin was the one who coined the term "new abroad" in his speech. Later, it was Medvedev who actually made it very clear that there is this sense of the sphere of or the regions of special or privileged interests, and soon after that, the first milestone, which was very much kind of giving you a clearer sense of what Russia might be aiming at, was this declaration from Putin about having Eurasian Union by 2015. Well, I mean, we have a very clear distillation of the of a very clear sense of how they look at the development of the policy. Of course. We also have to talk about the self-determination, and the whole idea of self-determination being the biggest. I call it the Damoclean sword of for every other country that we're going to be talking about here, but also beyond that, because when we talk about, for example, the Russian citizenship, that will definitely going to be used as one of the tools for self-determination, not only the Russian citizenship, of course. I mean, we have to look at the percentages of the population in all the former Soviet states with Russian, ethnic Russian representation. And many people think that, yes, Ukraine was too big. In Ukraine, the Russian element was too big, but that's such a huge problem. But if we look at the facts, no, actually, there are even starker problems that I can observe. For example, in Ukraine, the percentage of Russians is approximately 17%. 17, yeah. I mean, there are different estimates how they self-identify, but still. If you look, for example, in Latvia, it's 27%. If you look in Estonia, it's about 25%. If we look in Kazakhstan, it's 27%. In Belarus, it's 8.5. Here we have 5 point. But what the argument I'm making is that there is a bigger problem that people think just because Ukraine was so divided and there was not a kind of a prerequisite for anything like this to happen in other areas, the facts are actually not observed. So the irredentism, which is going to be on the rise, will be highly challenging, I think, as a trend for many of the countries. And the way the Russians are going to be pursuing it is going to be more aggressive and more assertive. The self-determination problem, I think that the biggest problem stems from the fact of its vagueness and ambiguity. I think that the biggest problem is that the West hasn't come up with any standard definition of how the modus operandi should be put in place. There is no single standard. Of course, I'm truistically kind of letting you know what are the problems. But of course, Russia is using this. I mean, when I was analyzing every single time there was a self-determination claim by any of the new entrants of like Crimea, for example, they're always referring to Kosovo precedent. Every single time they're referring to it, let it be the Crimea Council, which actually announced the referendum, the later petition which was sent to Duma. You know, you always have the Kosovo precedent. Medvedev, during its recognition of our territories as independent, there was a clear sign, and there as well. You know, they're talking about this precedent. So this the 2006 precedent will be haunting many of the countries, I guess, and that problem I don't see. Like I see that hanging on us as a Damoclean sword. Of course, we have to talk also about the constitutional law of Russia, about the integration of new entities. And I think that the amendments which were introduced are once again kind of a clear sign that they're going to be easing this direction as well. I'm not saying that, yes, those things are inevitable, but what I'm saying is that when we're trying to assess the threat is actually is becoming more and more evident because Russia is preparing all the infrastructure it will need for achieving its goals. So they're putting in place the legislative infrastructure. They're putting in place the military infrastructure. And I'll talk about the power component or the hard power component. But that still kind of continues to be the big problem and will continue to be a big problem. Though when we talk about the self-determination, I see a huge discrepancy between the short-term goals that Russia will have when it comes to promoting the self-determination among the other countries, but not seeing that being as part of their own problem in the long term. And I think I simply don't see that being the very cohesive policy, even though it has a clear sign that Russia sees as being the one. And of course, if we look at the nationalism paradigm, which has been very much also supported by Kremlin, I come to be very I don't know, like split between who makes these decisions? Because if you have the very idea of greater Russia, where we have this irredentism being kind of Russia-centric, and then you have self-determination there being played, I don't see how they're going to be aligning these two in the long term. In the short term, yes, more or less that can be understood. Just going back to the hard power element, I think that the conflict zones will be used more and more as a hard power element in the progression and in the projection of Russian power. This has been the case, of course, in Abkhazia and South Tskhinvali region. For quite some time, I've been observing the addition of offensive weaponry in the regions. Definitely, it's far more than necessary for catering any threat coming from Georgia. That's why they have always been. That's what they have been always talking about, because there is a direct threat from Georgia. So that will be the biggest problem. But of course, there is a different calculation there. It's going to be more about the future moves that might be undertaken. The other problem, of course, is the serious resource mismatch when it comes to the military component. Russians definitely know that there is no other power present in the former Soviet space. The power component is going to be increasing. They definitely have this thinking in Central Asia, where they basically the last American farpost when it comes to the bases or the presence there was is gone. So Russia is actually increasing its preponderance when it comes to the military presence, and that projection will be increasing. And actually, there is a new development. Russia is thinking about increasing the power projection capacity beyond the Soviet former Soviet space. They have potentially new deal with Argentina recently about having a new military base there. So that actually changes the whole military doctrine of Russia for as such, because it's going to be expansionist, and this is going to be continuing. That's the trend I see there. Of course, we have to talk about the satellite regimes, or there are different terms we can call the local elites in the occupied territories or in different conflict zones, but I call them either proxies or installed leaders, etc. But these entities are not sustainable when it comes to them being independently self-sustainable. If you look at the way Russia is funding these entities, yeah, I mean, it's depending on various estimates, it's from 90 to 98%. So and we talk here about the direct budgetary transfer coming from Russia. We have approximately 70% of sources from Russia going to Abkhazia, and I'm not even talking about such things as social benefits. Russia funds the huge proportion of the different kinds of allowances. Of course, pensions are one of them, and this dependency is going to be increasing. And of course, they also have special support schemes for the military. You have to add that to the kind of the whole assistance package that they are giving to the local regimes. And that's going to be continuing. Actually, in Transnistria, you have a bit of a different arrangement, because they also support them through the energy, which has been a big part of the dependence of Transnistria on Russia. But I mean, for example, in Tkhinvali region, we have the same thing. I mean, the energy plays a role there, but just a food for thought. But now I'm coming to where we stand today and what to expect. Well, there is a talk about the future of the region, and we talk about the two opposing projects. One is the Eurasian Union, and then there is the European Union approximation scheme, as I call it, the scheme which has been accelerated due to the events which took place in Ukraine. Well, with all due respect to the very benevolent and I would say extremely timely measures or desires or ambitions of the Western countries to approximate our Georgia, let it be Moldova or Ukraine, I think that it would still be not enough of a step, because in the end, what is missing is the security component. Because after signature of AA in June, nothing really changes, because this process will be dragging. But if you look at the tangible benefits, there aren't going to be a lot of tangible benefits for shielding Georgia or Moldova or any other country from the very tangible threats that we're going to be facing. So, I mean, that's definitely a big weakness, because if that's not catered, I don't see that being very, very, let's say, effective. The other problem that we see from Tbilisi, but not only from Tbilisi, is that there is a huge mental cleavage between the new members of NATO, new members of EU, and the rest. And this is so stark that people, the ones who are actually supporting the pro-Western sentiments in Georgia, where I mean, opinion-forming elites, are very much. Everyone is talking about this. So just giving you a sense that this is much something that we actually see as being one of the biggest revelations, and it's actually increasing this gap. The way it's actually seen. The other lesson that we have to learn from Crimea is that there is going to be a huge, I mean, we are all going back to basics, which means that it's also always going to be now about people being more reliant on realpolitik methods. You know, the one thing that I can think is that people will start to I mean, a lot of corporations in the military-industrial complex will be happy because people will start talking about actually more about going back to basics, and the people will be more prone to be going that way. Well, the other lesson that I see and that we can equate from the Crimea is that what's going to be the next? Because it was 2008, it was Georgia, there was the reset with Russia, then there was Syria. After Syria, there is Crimea, and I think this succession really creates a very logical trend. So what's next? And I think that we all have to be talking about this as well. I mean, what we think is going to be the next move, because when I look at the division among the Western countries, I don't see that there is going to be a one voice which is going to be countering the trend. Because all up until now, there is still no decision in EU on how to proceed with the sanctions. And even though I think that the US has been taking the lead on the sanctions part, I think it's not going to be enough without the one voice around it. And that's actually very much seen in small parts of the world, like Tbilisi or let it be elsewhere. And that actually creates ripples, the emotional ripples in our region. The other thing is that Putin is going to be moving forward because he always likes to demonstrate his strength. He punished Georgia in 2008. He's punishing Ukraine for what has been done to overthrow the or the government that he was more likely having. And he was going to be going all the way. He will show that he's going to be punishing them. Well, if you look at this trajectory, after the signature of AA, what is going to be happening with this symbolics that Putin likes to play with? Well, is it going to be about Transnistria, or is it going to be more about Georgia again, with new problems? And I can talk about the scenarios that I can foresee what the problems can be in Georgia. But again, he's going to be trying to show that he's stronger than others, and others should be responding to him. The other lesson that I drew from what is happening is that Putin leads and everyone else reacts, and he likes this. He usually likes to wait as well because he definitely has this judo mentality. He likes to use your force against you, and he can wait. That's how he was waiting for 2006. He was preparing. The active phase of Russian assertiveness actually started to be very much starkly different from 2006 onwards. Before that, he was preparing the ground, as I was saying. I mean, preparing infrastructure with the citizenship law, with tightening the grip in the occupied territories, with increasing the military platform in all of these regions. So he's leading now, and he sees that others are reacting. Well, that's going to be something that we're going to be looking at in the times to come. Well, U.S. retreat. I mean, I've heard about this phrase, and that's definitely felt. And I have to be saying that the region definitely sees that being the case. Unfortunately, this is not only the feeling of Georgians, that's the feeling of Eastern Europeans. And definitely that's, no one knows that better than Russians. And of course, that preponderance is felt, and it will have repercussions. The other question is that if there is an understanding and if there is the Cold War kind of picture being depicted, and everyone understands that there are two camps, which I'm very skeptical about, because I see the one camp, but I don't see the other camp yet, and I'm pretty sure that the West, the word should be rethought, and it has to be recoined, because we don't have the free world anymore, the same way it was understood before. Where the Iron Curtain is going to be hanging? Is it going to be hanging over us and taking us away from the free world, or for any short or medium term perspective of being part of this, or it's going to be somewhere at the already delineated borders? Well, we want to ask this question, and actually a lot of people are starting to ask this question, and that's going to be another question. The other thing we actually drew as a lesson is that markets react more effectively than governments. It's just amazing. In 2008, the biggest let's say, stick to Russia's actions was the the trend of decreasing confidence into Russian markets. We have observed a similar thing when it comes to the so-called Black Monday in this case. So it's very ironic, but markets are more sensitive to what has been done. But in the short term, in the long term, it's still about the governments, and that's the whole logic. Because the moment the sanctions were announced to be very weak, the markets have started to go up. So once again. My claim is that my logic is that it's still about the governments. It's still about the governments to lead. If the governments don't lead, the markets will stop at certain point to punish the ones who actually erode the trust. And the bigger question is the question of the sovereignty, because if we look at the Russian trajectory of how they want to be going forward, there are a few developments that I see. The first one is that they really create this greater Russia space where you have Russian citizens, and there is no clear borders, and everything is kind of erased. Or there is the concept of limited sovereignty. This was practiced during the Soviet times. It was known as having a de facto veto on anything when it comes to the foreign policy of the country, plus being in control of major assets on the ground. That's how the Eastern Bloc countries were actually managed for quite some time during the Soviet times. So the question is, how are we going to be, or what we're going to be seeing as being the Russia's modus operandi when it comes to the countries of the region? Well, I think I have many other things to talk about. I think I've talked too much, so I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So now we have quite a number of issues